So this is JS Database Systems 1, Module 9 lecture, and I'm your instructor, Robert Hewlett. So what I want to talk about now is WebStorm, Node.js within WebStorm, Express, the Node.js framework, JADE, a templating language that is used by Express, the concept of routes and methods within Node, the Node package manager, and a library called PG that we can use to connect to Postgres when we're using Node in the back end. So first, I want to describe what is this thing called WebStorm, describe the components of Node.js itself, just what is it all about, discuss this Express framework, the JADE templating language that Express uses. We have to get how to write HTML using the JADE templating language. We'll do this in lab. List common web server methods that we can take advantage of. Describe the routes that are therefore available within Node.js by combining the methods. And create and use session variables in Node.js on the back end. And again, we'll be doing that in lab. So what is WebStorm? Well, WebStorm is an IDE. It's based on IntelliJ by JetBrains. IntelliJ is used in GST 7010 and in 8010. Partway through 8010, we'll switch to something called Android Studio, which is Android development based on the IntelliJ IDE. So if you've taken 7010 or plan to be taking 7010 or 8010, then you'll reuse some of what you will learn here, or you can leverage it as you take this course. It's not free. We can go get IntelliJ JetBrains for free, the community edition, but WebStorm right now doesn't have a community edition. We have an educational license at BSIT, which allows us to use it, which we renew every year. It is tuned for JavaScript development, so that's WebStorm, and it supports many different types of Java projects. Node.js, the one we'll be using in the lab, Dart, Angular based ones, or just straight up HTML5, and of course there are other applications. What we have here is when you make a new project in the version of WebStorm that we're running via Apps Anywhere, we can make an empty project, boilerplate, web starter kit, Twitter Bootstrap, which apparently is the most popular one out there, AngularJS, Node.js, PhoneGap, and a few more. I've recently installed a more updated version on my laptop, and this list has gotten a little bit longer in that. But these are all the choices you have coming in the WebStorm. All of these are JavaScript HTML5 type choices. But we'll be focusing on the one called Node.js Express app. So to just demystify WebStorm, what we'll do is you can pause this presentation and watch the demo called HelloWorld. So you can pause this presentation now. So now that we've seen how you make a Node.js application in WebStorm, let's talk a little bit more about Node.js itself. So what is Node.js? Well, it's JavaScript in the back end. So not Java, Java server pages, servlets, Java server faces, not PHP, not ASP.NET, which could be VB.NET, or C#.NET, but JavaScript. And the concept there is that the same JavaScript that you use in the front end up in the browser, you can use in the back end to build the app. Okay, but because JavaScript in essence has been ported to run in the back end as a server, it can also be used to build desktop applications, which may sound really weird. But a JS company, Mapbox, is taking complete advantage of this to help them build their tiles. It can also be used for shell scripting. So where we might, run a Bourne shell script that runs some PHP or runs some Python or something, you could actually get to run JavaScript using this same technology. How most people are using Node.js is that they build a web server. And that's right. That's why the long pause, a web server. We're most used to when we use PHP or one of these back-end languages like Java server pages, we build something smaller, servlet, applet, little web app. But no, when you're working with Node, you build a custom web server every time. Not a web page, not a web app. You're actually building a web server. Tiny little lie. People don't quite explain that in the beginning with Node, but that is what's happening. Okay, but there are a lot of software products. Let's take ArcGIS Server, where that's all you run on that on a box is ArcGIS Server. And so there is just one app which has a lot of web technology in it, right? That allows you to publish services. And so Node is sort of like for building applications at that kind of scale. And so it's a little weird at first. It's a subtle little change, but yeah, you're not building a web page or a web app. You're building a web server that has web pages and web apps potentially inside it. So it's a little different. So this is out of a lecture. The video link is at the end of this presentation, and I do recommend watching this video. It's a great overview of Node. And so, what is Node about? One of the big things about Node is its event loop, or what some people call asynchronous I/O. So this event loop allows for asynchronous I/O. And what's all that about? So that means that you can process large chunks of data back on the server without tying up your front-end application. You kind of make requests to the server takes that request and then frees you up to do other things. And as it processes your data, it has the ability, depending how you write the code, to send little chunks of data back, or once it's done processing all the data, fire that back at your application when it's ready. But because it queues everything up as an event, the event loop comes by and picks up your requests, and then it might come by again and process a little bit of data, and then come by again and process a little bit more data, and then come by again and process a little bit more. And depending again how you write the code, when do you want to be notified? Do you want to be notified every time it reads a line out of a file? Or do you say, look, hey, just go read all the lines of the file. When you get that done, then send me the data. And so it works in this loop, switching between requests, processing data. It has all these events based in. One of the events that you'll see a lot of time is like on end. Like, so when I'm done processing rows out of the database or lines out of a file or something else out of a web service, I'll send something back to you. And then your web browser then will get notified, hey, something's happened or something's completed, and here comes the data. And then you can go grab the data. But the whole idea is that you don't wait for anything, right? You make a request and then you're freed up right away. And whenever it's done, it'll get a hold of you later on via callback and send you the data. But you don't have to sit there waiting for it to process it. And it does this. One thing you'll hear people say, Node.js, it only uses one thread, right? Or one process. Ooh, that's not good. But actually, the way it does it, is quite effective. Lots of people try to scale up applications by using multiple threads or multiple processes. But most of those threads wait. So your application is not very responsive as it waits. The whole thing about Node is no one waits for anyone. And even if it's going to take a long time, there's no point in waiting. Just whenever it's done, it'll get a hold of you via the callback to let you know that it's finished. And then you can process the results on the front end. So Node has a few things. It's actually quite small. It's only about 35 files, I think, in total. But you have a Node standard library which binds into C++ code and C code that knows how to talk HTTP, right? Talk to sockets, because most of your HTTP traffic happens on sockets. Knows how to talk to the file system. At its core, in the corner over on the left, is the V8 engine. And this V8 engine is the JavaScript engine that runs Google's Chrome. Because it's open source, someone just took that V8 engine and figured out a way to compile it and make it run back on a server. There's something called the thread pool. So although you don't deal with threads, Node can spawn other threads to have more workers work on things and that. But that's all taken care of for you. There's this event loop, one of the core things as it cycles around, handling more requests in that. And it has a crypto library for encrypting data and decrypting, right? And also a DNS library for looking up web addresses and that, because it's all built around the internet. But there's not too much to Node, the standard part, right? What makes Node really effective is the Node Package Manager, which allows you to add all the libraries for building applications with this Node framework and architecture. So this is just a few bits and pieces that make the core part of Node run. And a lot of the binding is done in C++ code or C code, so it runs about as fast as you can run. But all the JavaScript that you write gets parsed and processed through the V8 engine. So just to review, what is that V8 engine again? Right? That's the thing that interprets your JavaScript. Same engine used by Chrome. Right? This is why one can use JavaScript for shell scripts and desktop apps, because the V8 engine is not running inside of Chrome. It's actually running sort of as a desktop virtual machine, much like there's a virtual machine in Java. The event loop is all about non-blocking I/O or asynchronous I/O. So instead of you waiting and processing the whole file or the web service or the database is all processed using events. And events fire off to say, hey, I read a line. Hey, I processed a row. Hey, I'm done processing the rows. And you do all event-based programming that way. And again, crypto for encryption, right? So if you're dealing with HTTPS, right? So encrypted sites, being able to send encrypted data and decrypt data. Dynamic name service, looking up basically web addresses, forwarding, all that sort of stuff. And like I said, it's only about 35 JavaScript files. Not too much. A part of what most people, when they jump in the node, have to deal with right away is this thing called Express. So what is Express? Express is a backend framework. And so why did I say that? Because it's not a front-end framework. In the previous lecture, we learned about front-end frameworks, jQuery, Dojo, Angular. Those are front-end things. But we're talking about running JavaScript in the back-end. So we need a back-end framework. And sort of the default, de facto standard framework for Node is Express. It's almost a blessing that there's just one top dog. There's a few more like Happy and that over at Walmart, but Express is pretty dominant, which is okay, which means you don't have these questions like, should I be using jQuery or should I be using Dojo or use them both? Out of the box, WebStorm sets you up in Express, so you just have to learn Express to get things up and running. Once you become more mature in terms of writing Express apps, then I would say go take a look at Happy and compare them and see if that works better for you. So what do you get when you use a framework? So you get a fixed directory structure, which is great. You have to learn what that directory structure is about, but then you know where everything's going to be once you learn that. So you get a startup JavaScript. So the app.js file is basically a JavaScript file that fires up the web server. Because remember, we're making a web server. So all that complexity about how do you make a web server? How do you make it run on port 3000 or 80? So all that's handled by app.js. You get a default index page to get you started, because a lot of apps today, well, not a lot, but a few web apps try to be single page apps. And so you can usually handle it with one page. So you get a default index page, you get two predefined routes, and we got to figure out what routes are. You get index get and users get, and I got the method in here because that becomes important later on. You get some predefined views in JADE, and a few other goodies in terms of styles and that as well. So a fixed directory structure, a place where you can import node packages, that's part of that structure called node modules. You get your startup app that knows how to make the web server. You get your default index page and your predefined routes. You get your JADE views and a few other things, but enough to get you up and running so that you can start editing the files within that directory structure to start customizing for your particular application. So again, the apps.js file is the one that actually makes the web server and runs on a particular port. The views are what are typically a mixture of HTML and code. They get rendered into raw HTML and that gets sent to the browser, and that's what you see. There's a public folder, and so if you have static images, cascading style sheets, front-end JavaScript libraries like OpenLayers or code that we'll write for our labs, we'll put them in those particular directories. Again, you have a routes folder, and this is where your index.js file is going to be, and this is where if you're going to define a new route, and that is where that's going to happen. And like I mentioned previously, node modules, where when you run the Node Package Manager, you can install libraries for talking to Postgres, or install libraries for dealing with session variables, or install libraries for doing leaflet and open layers and such. And you can find out a lot more info about Express at http://expressjs.com. Part of what comes with Express is JADE. So the JADE templating language, what's it all about? Well, it's a mix of HTML and code, right? And I say yes very sarcastically because that's what Java server pages was about. That's what PHP is about. It's what ASP is about and ASP.NET is about. It's about mixing code and HTML. And the hope is that maybe we could get away from that. But the one thing is that the code is JavaScript. So we can have JavaScript in the back end, we can have JavaScript in the front end, and we can have JavaScript in our mix of HTML and code. And although at first it can be frustrating, right? It can be effective. And so, but learning curve again. Basically, JADE is shorthanded HTML. It's self-closing HTML, and it does the closing via your indentation. So you have to be very careful when you're doing JADE to get the indentation right. You can have variables. You can deal with JSON, which is, JavaScript objects from the server, and that. And you can find a lot more information here at JADE, the jadelang.com site, and the tutorials. Tutorials is actually probably the better place to start. But basically, we can shorthand HTML because we don't have to do closing tags and we don't have to have all the angle brackets. We can mix code when we need to. So if we have the loop and process a bunch of data, we can do that right in the JADE. And all of that mix of code and HTML will get translated into pure HTML and then sent to the browser for us. So here is an example that I guess is it's the layout.jade that will be generated for every Express app made in WebStorm. You get doc type HTML, you get HTML. Notice that there aren't any closing tags. And then we'll see that head is tabbed in under HTML. And so his title is tabbed in underside a head. And we can see that the link. So what it is because you don't have the angle brackets and because you don't do the closing tags, it really starts to condense the HTML. And once you get the code and the looping in there, it really makes the HTML shrink. You also have the ability to do includes, block content, which means that another page that extends the layout.jade will get everything. They'll get doc type, HTML, head, title, link, and then their code will be injected into this block content area. And then this is my index.jade, right? It extends layout, so I get everything that layout had. So I'm going to go back to layout here quickly. I get all of that. But my content gets dropped in the body block content. So my block content gets switched for its block content. And here I have some more stuff, text that'll show up. Log into PostgreSQL. I'll have a little form. Notice that indented from my form are my input types and that. And I just don't have my closing tag. So it does clean up HTML. But then you need to know three things, I guess. HTML, this shorthand version of HTML. JavaScript to do any looping and conditional things that you want to do. And, well, and the fact that the indentation will put in the closing tags for you. So maybe that was 5 things. So what I want to do now is talk about the concept of routes and methods within Node. When we talk to a web server, most of us, when we learn PHP or even Java server pages, we typically just deal with gets and posts. But a web server has a lot more methods. It has checkout and connect and copy and delete, head, lock, merge, make activity, write, make call, move, search, notify, options, patch, right? Prop find, prop patch, purge, put, report, search, subscribe, trace, unlock, unsubscribe. And so most of us have, if we've done any web server-side programming, maybe we said the method was equal to get and post. But we have all of these available. And we do have to remember that when we're dealing with Node, we are making a custom web server, not a web app. And so we could, on our forms, choose a different method, right? What if I want to have a form where someone deletes a row out of a database? Well, I could, from my form, send the delete method and handle that route differently back in my backend JavaScript. It's really up to me in terms of my creativity and how clever I want to be, because I am making a custom web server each time I build a Node.js Express app. Now, in the previous examples, when I built the default application and the browser fired up, it went to HTTP localhost port 3000. That's all handled in the app.js file. But the thing is, it went to the very root of the web server. It'd be like you going to www.bcit.ca/. You're going to the root of that web server. And therefore, the route is just / or the root. And we would do this if we're on the file system. If we want to get to the top of the directory tree really quick, we would just put a / in and change directory / go right to the root. The method is get. Why? Because the browser sent it. So when you type an address into a browser, then the browser sends get. Okay. Once you have a form, you have a property on a form called method, and it's up to you to choose what method you want to use after that. And so that came in to your app.js, and it dispatched it on via the routes. And there's usually a route there. It usually goes a method get, and then it looks at what route got sent, root, and then it typically render some JADE templating into HTML. And so the specifics of how that route gets handled in this Express framework is done in the index.js file. And so we'll take a look at that. So we got some stuff at the top. Hey, I'm making an Express app. Hey, I want a router. But this is the part that really triggers on your web browser when it went localhost :3000 / root. And this is what got triggered. It's router.get. So that .get matches one of those methods on that previous slide. If you just type an address into a web browser, then it's going to do a get by default. And so it'll go to router.get. And the next part inside the parentheses is the route. So get is the method, right? Single quote / single quote is the route. So we're combining, there's two things at play here, the method and the route. And so when your web server, right, your custom web server gets a get request on the route root /, then this function down below will fire off. And so there's a little function here that takes 3 parameters, request, response, and next. And this will get picked up on the event loop, and then later on, when it's ready, res.render will get fired. So when someone calls in on the route with the method get, it's really about the method get on the route, then eventually I want to, on the response object, that's the thing that can talk to the browser, render the index page. And the index page is an index.jade file. But you do have the ability to send in some data, or data would be the right term, arguments to that page. Here it's all wrapped up in a JSON object. How do I know that? Begins with a curly brace, ends with a curly brace. I got my key value pair, title, colon, and then a value. And then inside your index.jade file, you can, if we follow the arrow, that key value pair, right, I can have that show up as a variable and have an h1 tag with that title in there, and that can go welcome to, and also use the title again as well. But basically, your browser does a get with this route, go get me this page, as it talks to your custom web server. That triggers router.get on the root if they did send the root in. If they send in a different route, then you might get an error in that. And then that will eventually link into your index.jade view, which will get translated from a mix of HTML and code into pure HTML and sent to the browser. What I want to go over a little bit is the interplay between the layout.jade view and the index.jade view. So most of the content you see on the upper left is from layout. So document type HTML, this is an HTML document. This is my HTML opening tag, my head opening tag, my title tag, a link into my cascading style sheets, and then a body tag, and then sort of a place marker to say, look, someone's going to swap in some content here, right? So there's a block of JADE templating language that's going to be separated, not injected via the word content. Now over on the right, down the bottom corner, is the HTML out of the index.jade. It simply says hey, I extend layout, which means I get all the stuff up in the left, upper left, right? And then my content, my block content gets substituted for the layout's block content. And what I add to layout is a little H1 tag and a little paragraph tag and a little message. And I extract out basically the title from the JSON, little JSON object that gets sent in as an argument. And I'll display that as well. I'm going to completely switch gears here. Well, not completely, but we're going to switch gears off of just that interplay between routes and methods and talk about the Node Package Manager, the heavy lifting that's going to have to occur in your app. So NPM does stand for the Node Package Manager, and I'm actually going to go out and we'll take a look at this. So we got the Node Package Manager site loading. So they have some stats right at the top, which is kind of fun to look at to get a feel for, well, is this Node stuff big or small? So the Node Package Manager says it has 211,518 packages. Okay, that's a lot of packages. PG is one of them. OpenLayers is one of them. There's a heck of a lot of code that you can use to build apps. How popular is this site? Well, downloads in the last day. That's over 131 million. What about the last week? That's over 500 million, right? And what about the last month? That's almost 3 billion downloads in the last month. So this is very popular. There's a lot of momentum. Very popular site, but very popular language, JavaScript, and a lot of libraries that people are using. And we're going to contribute to this total when we start building our Node apps as well, because we'll use the Node Package Manager to actually install them. So I was going to jump back in here and go full screen again. But just to get a feel for Node and the Node Package Manager, it's being used by a lot of people all over the world. So how do we get those packages installed? Well, and within WebStorm, there's a little terminal that you can open. And it's like typing at the command line. And you simply type in npm install and then the name of package. You can take some hunting to find these packages, but ones that we'll use are npm install pg, npm install OpenLayers. How about express sessions? npm install proj, which is the proj4 library, right? So what if you had to do some geoprocessing and project some data in the back end? You get a library that'll do that for you. Yeah, the Node package install leaflet. If you want to work with Mapbox, and they have a little go-between Proj and Leaflet, so it can do projections. Do note that the OpenLayers actually has Proj built inside of it. And there's, like I said, a lot more. About 211,000 more packages that you can investigate to see if they can solve the problem for you. And they will all get loaded into your Node modules folder under the source folder for you. It can take a few seconds for them to show up, just so you know. So what I'm going to do now is we do another little demo about Node HelloWorld demo so that you can see some of this in action. What I want to talk about right now is PG. So this will be a short one. And PG is a library that we'll be using in the lab to connect to Postgres to get out some data. So to use PG, besides requiring it, making a variable, you got to connect to the database. And that usually takes some connection info. And that's typically username, password, host, port, database kind of thing. And then you got to provide it a function for it to call back on. So it's going to take your request and then let you go via the event loop. And then it will try to attempt to connect to the database and then send the result back to you via your callback. So you'll have some callback and it will get past three things. And you have to check them to see if it's okay. An error object. Maybe it was the wrong password, wrong username, the host name wasn't quite correct, and it couldn't make a connection. So the first thing you should check, hey, is there an error object? How do you check? Well, is it null or not null? If it's null, things were good. It's usually one of these is going to be null. Error will be null, client will be okay. Error won't be null, client will be null, right? But say you successfully connected, so it was all good. Port, host, username, password, database, all good. Then you will get back a valid client object. Error object will be null, client won't. Then you can use that client object to then do things in the database. What is done? Done is something that Brian C., who made PG, sends back to you. He says, look, here's my callback. When you're finished talking to the database, you call my done and I'll clean up for you. And so you can use his done to clean up things afterwards. Now, when done gets sent to you, no parentheses. Why? Because it's an unlit firecracker. If you want to call his done, you go done, put the parentheses on, right? That lights the firecracker, and then off it goes. Now, if you get a good client back, it's not null. In that, you can use it to query the database. Now, some queries can be DML, DDL, others will be QL, select. So the typical thing is, when you first start out, is you want to get data out of the database and do something with it in the browser. Now, traditionally, we would hook right to the database. We would get a result set back. We'd have a while loop. We go through all the rows, making something happen. Here, we move away from that procedural way of programming because this is all about event loops and asynchronous stuff, and we deal with the rows with events. So that while loop is done, but not by us. It's done by PG Connect. So back in the PG library, they have a while loop. Inside that while loop, every time they read a row, they raise an on-row event or emit an on-row event. People like to say they're event emitters. And so then you handle that. So typically you'll have a function that deals with a row being processed successfully. Most people just take the row and stick it in a result. That's what you're going to see in the lab. And then there's an on-end event. So after I'm done processing all the rows, what do you want to do? A lot of people use that as a trigger. Okay, I've got all the rows out of the database. Let's send it all to the browser. I mean, you could, on every row that's processed to the database, send it immediately to the browser if you wanted to in that. But most people let the rows get processed, and when the on-end is triggered, hey, I'm done with all the rows. Okay, let's package up that result object and shoot it back to the browser. Now you could process it as HTML or send the raw JSON right to the browser and let it deal with it. Now, on error. The first error object is really about your connection information. Was your username, password okay? What if there's something wrong with your SQL? You mentioned a table that doesn't exist in the database. Your SQL isn't quite formatted correctly. Big proponent of, hey, pre-baking those queries, which when I say that, I mean you go and take that SQL and you make sure it works in pgmin3. Because if it doesn't work in pgmin3, it's not going to work here through the library. But there could be something wrong with your SQL that'll throw an error. What if while you're processing the rows, you lose connectivity to the database? That can cause an error as well. And so you just need a function to handle that. And so the sum function is something you have to write, and you have to pass it as an unlit firecracker to PG Connect, and they'll just, when a row gets processed, they'll let you know. And when they're done processing, they'll let you know. And if something goes wrong, they're going to let you know via the callback functions. And so what I want to go over here now, we're almost done, but I just want to go over how does that connection information get in. There's lots of different examples, but I like to use a JSON example. So you'll have a router.get, and we'll typically make a copy of that and make a router.post. And so if someone posts back on the route, which we'll probably do in the lab, then this is what I want to happen. When someone first gets the page, give them the form to fill in. When someone's filled in the form and post it back, then I want to try to connect. So what you have to do is extract the connection information from the request that came in. So a request comes in, right? A post request on the route. And so here, what am I doing? I'm making a variable called connection config. It is a JSON variable. So it starts with a brace, ends with a brace. Inside there, I have key value pairs. Host, port, database, user, password are all my keys. right? They're on the left side of the colon. On the right side is the value. And so the value I'm extracting from the request from the body of the HTML for a node called host. It could be a div, it could be something else, but in this case it will be an input within a form. Now those names have to match. Host has to match whatever you put in our case, in the JADE templating file as the name of that input. Same with port, same with database, same with username, same with password. Because it's JavaScript and case sensitive, lots of things can go wrong here. You kind of have to have the two files up on the screen to make sure what you say in your JADE, eventually HTML, matches what you say here in JavaScript. But basically that's how I extract what the user typed into the form so that I can get busy making a connection. Basically now, I mean, it's lab time now. Enough talk. Some of the stuff you just have to see in action, and the best way to that is just to start coding, and some of these concepts and ideas and what's happening will become more clear. If you need to re-examine a topic or need clarification on a term or concept, or just have a question, you can get an answer by posting a note on one of the discussion boards for your course. This concludes this lecture.